Picture this. You're walking, not exercising, not training, just walking. Maybe it's after dinner, when the day finally slows down. Maybe it's a quiet walk around the block because you've been sitting too long. Nothing about it feels intense. Nothing about it feels like fat loss. It feels ordinary, almost forgettable. And that's exactly why most people assume nothing important is happening. Now here's an uncomfortable question. If we could pause time right now and look inside your abdomen while you're walking, would your belly fat look calm? Or would it look quietly strained, still holding on, still protecting itself? Most people have never thought about fat that way. They imagine fat loss as something you force through effort, sweat more, push harder, burn more calories. But belly fat doesn't respond to force the way muscle does. It responds to state. Most people assume walking is too gentle to matter, that unless your heart is pounding or your legs are burning, your body isn't making real metabolic decisions. From that perspective, walking is just movement. Nice, but not powerful. Yet physiologists and clinicians see something else entirely. They see that fat loss doesn't begin with intensity. It begins when the body changes how it interprets its environment. Here's the part almost no one talks about. Belly fat, especially visceral fat, is not passive storage. It's active tissue. It listens constantly to signals about stress, blood sugar, and safety. When those signals suggest uncertainty, belly fat stays locked. When those signals soften, belly fat becomes willing to release energy. And walking, under the right conditions, is one of the clearest ways to change those signals. Stay with me, because what happens next is rarely talked about. This isn't about how long it takes to lose weight or how many steps you need to hit. This is about the very first sign that tells you your body has shifted out of protection mode and into release mode. The moment your body decides it's safe enough to let belly fat go. That sign is subtle. It doesn't show up on the scale. It doesn't show up in the mirror right away. And it's easy to miss if you're only looking for effort or exhaustion. But once you know what to look for, you'll understand why some walks change nothing, and others quietly change everything. By the end of this, you won't be guessing whether walking is working. You'll understand what your body is waiting for, and how to recognize the moment it starts responding. And to do that, we need to look at who actually decides when belly fat is released, because it's not the part of your body most people blame or praise. That decision is made upstream, long before fat ever leaves the abdomen. To understand that moment, we have to stop blaming belly fat itself and look at the system that controls it. Belly fat doesn't act on its own. It responds to instructions, and those instructions come from a network your body uses to decide whether energy should be stored or released. That network includes your nervous system, your hormones, and the circulation that delivers their messages. Belly fat is not stubborn. It is obedient to the signals it receives. Yes, the organ we're talking about is belly fat. But even more important than the fat is the system behind it, the one constantly assessing risk and demand. Think of your heart as the pump, your blood vessels as the highway system, and your nervous system and hormones as the control center that decides whether traffic should speed up, slow down, or stop entirely. Fat cells are not decision makers. They are responders. When the highways are narrow and stiff, traffic slows. The pump has to push harder. Blood pressure rises. Stress signals increase. In that environment, belly fat interprets the situation as unstable. Energy needs to stay close. Protection takes priority over release. This is why belly fat is so closely linked to chronic stress, poor poor sleep, and blood sugar swings. It's not about willpower, it's about what the system perceives. Here are a few numbers that help frame this without fear, just awareness. Belly fat, especially visceral fat, is strongly associated with insulin resistance and cardiometabolic risk, even in people whose body weight appears normal. Many people carry excess belly fat without realizing it, because it doesn't always change the scale dramatically. At the same time, large studies using wearable data have shown that meaningful metabolic benefits begin earlier than most people expect, often before people feel like they've done anything significant. This matters because it tells us something important. The body doesn't wait for exhaustion to change its behavior. It waits for clarity. It waits for repeated signals that say, energy demand is controlled, stress is not escalating, and circulation is flowing smoothly. When those conditions are present, belly fat becomes less defensive. Walking is one of the simplest ways to influence this system, not because it burns a lot of calories, but because it gently reorganizes how blood flows, how hormones behave, and how the nervous system interprets movement. A short walk starts this process. A longer walk strengthens it. But the key is not effort. The key is the internal environment being created. Once you understand that belly fat responds to system-level signals rather than localized effort, the idea of a first sign starts to make sense. That sign won't be a physical sensation in your abdomen. It will be a shift in how your body is regulating itself as a whole. And that brings us to what happens before belly fat is ever released, in the first few minutes of walking, when the body is still deciding whether this movement represents a threat or a safe, manageable demand. The moment you start walking, the internal clock begins, even though nothing about it feels dramatic. In the first minute or two, your muscles ask for slightly more oxygen. Not urgently, just enough to signal that you're no longer resting. Your nervous system registers that change and shifts out of full idle mode. Your heart responds by beating a little faster and a little stronger. Not because you're stressed, but because it's adjusting to a new, manageable demand. As blood flow increases, something important happens inside your blood vessels. The inner lining, called the endothelium, senses the movement of blood brushing past it. This lining isn't passive plumbing. It's a responsive surface that reacts to flow by releasing signals that help vessels relax and open. One of those signals is nitric oxide. You don't feel it, but resistance begins to drop. Circulation becomes smoother. The pump doesn't have to push as hard. At this point, it's important to be clear. This is not the sign that belly fat is being released. In the first couple of minutes, your body is preparing, not committing. It's reducing friction, improving flow, and gathering information. Is this a brief interruption, or is this the start of something sustained? As you move into the 3 to 10-minute range, the picture starts to change internally. Your breathing rhythm shifts. Inhales deepen slightly. Exhales become more complete. That breathing pattern feeds back into your nervous system and begins to soften the constant alert tone many people live with. Stress signals don't disappear, but they loosen their grip. Blood vessels continue responding to sustained flow, becoming more flexible in real time. Vascular resistance drops further, which means your heart works more efficiently. Muscles begin taking up glucose more readily, reducing the need for high insulin signaling. These changes matter because insulin and stress hormones are two of the strongest signals telling belly fat to stay put. Still, even here, belly fat has not begun to release in a meaningful way for most people. This phase is often misunderstood. Many assume that because they feel warmer, calmer, or clearer-headed, fat loss must be happening. But what's actually happening is that the conditions that block fat release are weakening. The locks are loosening, but the door hasn't opened yet. This is why many walks feel good but don't seem to change belly fat at first. The body is still cautious. It's still evaluating. It hasn't yet seen enough evidence that energy demand will remain controlled and safe. Understanding this is crucial because it explains why the first real sign of belly fat release does not appear immediately. That sign emerges only after the body has stayed in this lower stress, well-regulated state long enough to change its priorities. And that happens later in the timeline, when preparation gives way to permission. As walking continues beyond those early minutes, the internal conversation shifts in a way that most people never notice, because it doesn't come with drama or discomfort. This is where the first real sign begins to appear, not in how your body looks, but in how it behaves. The nervous system settles more fully. The constant background tension that keeps stress hormones circulating starts to quiet. Cortisol, instead of fluctuating or staying elevated, begins to trend downward in a more stable way. This matters because cortisol is one of the strongest signals telling belly fat to stay protected. When cortisol remains high, fat cells interpret the environment as uncertain. When cortisol falls and stays down, the message changes. The body no longer feels like it needs to guard every reserve. At the same time, insulin signaling becomes steadier. Blood sugar is being handled without sharp spikes. Muscles are using fuel efficiently. The system feels organized rather than reactive. This combination is the first real sign that belly fat is being released. Not burned away, not disappearing, but released. Fat cells begin allowing fatty acids to leave storage and enter circulation to support ongoing movement. This is a subtle shift in fuel sourcing, and you don't feel it as a sensation in your abdomen. You feel it as stability, as rhythm, as the sense that your body is working with you rather than resisting you. This usually happens later in the walk, often somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes, depending on the person. It happens when walking has lasted long enough to prove that the demand is real but not threatening. The body stops preparing for movement and starts supporting it. That is the transition point. That is the moment belly fat stops acting like a guarded vault and starts acting like an accessible energy reserve. It's important to understand that this is fat release, not immediate fat loss. The scale does not change in this moment. The mirror does not change in this moment. But internally, something important has shifted. The body has moved from defense to cooperation. Over time, repeated experiences of this state are what lead to visible changes. This is also why pace matters, but only gently. Walking at a steady, slightly brisk pace reinforces the signal that energy is being used consistently without stress. Walking too slowly may not sustain the signal long enough. Walking too hard can reintroduce stress and push cortisol back up. The sweet spot is movement that feels purposeful but calm, demanding but safe. Once this pattern is repeated, the body learns it. The nervous system becomes less reactive. Hormonal swings become smaller. Belly fat loses its reason to stay on constant alert. The first sign wasn't sweat or soreness. It was a shift in regulation. A quiet change in how your body decided to allocate energy. But there is one more piece that makes this sign easier to reach and easier to repeat. And it happens during moments most people never think of as fat-related at all. That piece shows up in the moments surrounding your walk, not just during it. One of the most overlooked factors in whether belly fat is released is timing. especially walking after meals or after periods of stress. These are windows when your body is already sending strong signals about storage or protection, and walking can either interrupt or reshape those signals. After a meal, your blood sugar rises and insulin increases to move that sugar into cells. From your body's perspective, this is a storage-oriented state. Energy has arrived. Resources are being organized. Belly fat interprets this as a reason to stay on guard. Sitting still after eating reinforces that message. Insulin stays elevated longer, and the signal to store remains dominant. Walking during this window changes the conversation. Blood flow shifts toward working muscles. Glucose is taken up more efficiently without requiring as much insulin. Blood sugar peaks become smoother instead of sharp. As insulin signaling settles, one of the strongest commands telling belly fat to stay locked begins to weaken. The body doesn't rush to release fat, but it becomes more willing to consider it. Stress creates a similar situation. When you're stressed, cortisol rises and tells your body to prepare for uncertainty. Energy should stay close. Protection comes first. Sitting still while stressed often allows that signal to linger. A walk that lasts only a few minutes may take the edge off, but a longer, steady walk gives the nervous system enough time to fully step out of alert mode. Cortisol begins to fall more consistently. The body receives clearer evidence that the threat has passed. This is why many people notice that the first real sign of belly fat release appears more reliably during longer walks, taken after meals or after stressful days. It's not because those walks burn more calories. It's because they directly counter the signals that keep belly fat defensive. The environment shifts from storage and protection toward balance and use. Over weeks and months, these moments accumulate. Clinicians don't just look at weight when assessing change. They see waist measurements begin to decrease before the scale moves. They see resting heart rate improve, a sign of better efficiency. They see faster recovery from exertion and fewer exaggerated stress responses. These changes reflect improved metabolic flexibility, not just energy balance. This is also where research surprises many people. Studies show that fat release often precedes visible fat loss. The body begins using stored energy more readily before any obvious changes appear. Longer, calmer walking sessions are more strongly associated with this shift than short, intense bursts. And the first sign most people experience is not fatigue, but a sense of steadiness, a feeling that their body is less reactive and more regulated. Before closing the loop, it's important to say this clearly. Walking is one of the safest forms of movement available, but anyone experiencing chest pain, dizziness, unusual shortness of breath, or who has known heart disease, uncontrolled blood pressure, or is recovering from surgery, should seek medical guidance before changing their routine. The goal is not to push through warning signs. It's to build a pattern your body can adapt to safely. At the start, we asked whether belly fat was calm or quietly strained. Now you know that the answer isn't fixed. It changes with state, timing, and repetition. Your body adapts to what you repeatedly ask it to do. When you repeatedly signal calm, sustained demand, belly fat eventually responds. What surprised you most? Was it that fat release happens before fat loss? That stress reduction matters more than effort? Or that the first sign is a shift in regulation rather than appearance? Share your thoughts, and if you're comfortable, share what your walking routine looks like right now. Someone reading your experience might need that encouragement. In the next video, we'll explore why insulin often decides what happens to belly fat long before calories ever do, and how to recognize when that signal is dominating your system.